Alright, so regular branded almost won a YCS, and we have to talk about it. Before we get into today's video and the breakdown of YCS Bologna, if you want to purchase any dope accessories for Christmas presents maybe, Sleeve Sheep has their drop today with the new collection and it is looking amazing. Make sure to check everything out. And if you want, you can use my affiliate link in the description box below so you can help the channel out as well. And by using my code Charo, you get 5% off your entire order. So let's go ahead and get started with the video. Alright, so let's start off with the day one deck breakdown and then we'll be able to compare it to some of the top cut representation. So we have Unchained at 12% as well as Rescue Ace at 12%, and these are the two most represented decks because if you see below everything else, almost 50% of the field is other decks. And obviously this is an indication of an insanely diverse format where you can pretty much play anything. We also have Tier Elements at 10% as well as Labyrinth, Purdy, and Bishio. Labyrinth and Purdy are both at 7% of the field and Bishio is at 4%. So among all of these, I think Bishio is the one that sort of caught some of us off guard, and I think it's a really solid pick. Overall, runic decks have been doing extremely well because of the versatility of runic cards, and the Bishio cards we have seen actually as just hand traps on their own, and we have Purdy as well as Labyrinth. So both of these decks prove themselves in recent months as just really solid contenders, and we kind of expected all of them to see representation as well as Tier Elements and then the top two decks, which are Unchained and Rescue Ace. Right now, if your engine is able to compete with the meta, not just non-engine, you're going to be able to do well, and all of the decks here pretty much thrive at this. You don't necessarily need your non-engine to stop your opponent. You're going to be able to pretty much dominate them with the help of your cards because they are just so strong. There's Turbulence, everything that Unchained does pretty much. Tier Limit is just comprised of engine mostly. Labyrinth cards are really good. What Furniture did for the deck is just amazing. It is an insane inclusion and we've been seeing this deck perform consistently. And with Purdy, just through engine, more than likely they're gonna OTK you, and if they don't, they just set up Noir. And if you pair every single one of these decks with the non-engine, which is able to compete against a variety of decks, then you have really solid strategies. So this day one breakdown just makes a ton of sense, and we are going to talk about some of the notable wins on stream a little later in the video. Alright, so now I want to take a look at top 64 and then obviously top 8 and the eventual winner. So let's compare the top 64 to the overall deck representation. We can see that Rescue Ace managed to take 22% of the field, while Unchained is only at 9%, and both of them were the most represented at 12%, so Rescue Ace obviously had a much higher conversion rate than Unchained. It's actually really interesting to me because Unchained was sort of deemed almost the better deck of the two, but they are most definitely at the top of the meta. So there may have been the reason of people just being prepared for Unchained maybe a little bit more than Rescue Ace, and just overall, Rescue Ace is insanely powerful right now with the addition of Sinful Spoils, and being able to take the deck into many different directions is, I think, what really works for it. You can't really know what to expect. You can either face the entire Terahertz combo or just a lot of the ability status, like 3 copies and going into Baron, or just regular stuff where they play around your Nibiru's and other hand traps potentially. So it's not that easy to prepare, and obviously just one Turbulence resolving is a lot. It is insane. But speaking of decks that maybe can beat Rescue Ace, Labyrinth just overall has a nice matchup like we've seen at the feature match, because pretty much everything that Rescue Ace is trying to do is destroy and target. And with Labyrinth, you cannot destroy or target when it comes to ladies. So it's much easier to set up and then try to go through their board and really grind, because that's what both of the decks are good at. But Labyrinth is amazing at it. So there is that, and obviously we see 14% representation, and it just makes a lot of sense. Labyrinth has been around for some time, but now it really established itself with Furniture and a couple trap cards, most notably Eradicator, but as long as it's legal, the deck is gonna use it, and it's just what's up. So I think that's pretty much all we have to say. Obviously, we saw Eradicator getting rid of 2 Lightning Storms, but on the other hand, the Lightning Storm would probably be the winning card for the opponent, so you kind of have to weigh everything and decide what your take is on that. But it was nevertheless a really nice match. And then we have tier limits as well. So there's tier limits as well as tier limit Horus. Both versions are nice, but Horus cards just really became much more popular in recent weeks. So this deck, again, it makes a ton of sense that this deck is performing. We already touched upon it a bit before. What this deck is able to do with Engine is amazing. And then we also have Centurion, Fire King, and Pearly at 6% representation. So Fire King making it in there at 6%, I think that's amazing. It's just so cool to see. I said this deck has potential, obviously much more post Phantom Nightmare and Maze of Millennia, but even now we are going to also take a look at a couple deck lists, so make sure to stay tuned. By the end of the video I'll have a couple deck lists for you as well. But yeah, Fire King is, obviously there's a surprise factor. Definitely. Not everyone is as familiar with the cards, and if they are, they're not as familiar with where to disrupt the deck. And yeah, there's a couple different things you can do with it. It's gonna get much better, but obviously now it has a lot of OTK potential, like we saw, because it has a lot of bodies and is benefiting off of destruction. So if your deck mostly destroys, it's kind of weird. Like Rescue Ace against Fire King, it's gonna be a little weird. And we had Centurion as well, so its first major event post its release, like the biggest event, and we already talked about it. It has a ton of potential, and we have Pearly as well, which is just such a solid contender and has been for some time. But what I also have for you guys is the other breakdown. So in top 64, we had 3 branded. Of those, there's 2 Chimera, as well as 2 Mikanko, 2 Vanquish Soul, 1 Dragon Link, 1 Kashtira, 1 Infernoble, 1 Marincess, 1 Rika, and 1 Runic Bestial. So a lot of diversity and a lot of really good decks that we do see at the top tables, at regionals and other events. So a couple of the most notable ones to mention that made it the furthest would be Branded, Infernoble, Mikanko made it to top 16, that's cool, as well as Runic Bestial, obviously doing really, really great. And now we're moving on to top 8, top 4, and so on. So we saw Runic Bestial, some Labyrinth decks, Infernoble, and also Branded. But unfortunately, Branded did not go all the way. It managed to go only to top 4, but still an amazing, amazing showing for this deck. Honestly, this player piloted Branded so well. And as for the other decks, Infernoble, again, having a really, really good showing, piloted by Pac, who is just amazing with the deck. And it's really nice. I keep saying Infernoble is amazing, just like be familiar with it, because it's probably gonna kick your ass if you're not. And okay, let's move on to top 4 that I already talked about. There's Runic Bestial, Labyrinth, as well as Branded and Rescue Ace. And then the finals were played out between Runic Bestial and Rescue Ace. In the end, Runic Bestial won the entire event. And this deck is out there. It's been out there. And Joshua pointed out in one of his interviews, it's just a deck he enjoys playing. And like I said before, taking Runic to this type of event is just smart. Your cards do a lot and you can cover many different matchups. And obviously he had a great time playing the deck. So that is so, so nice to see. He pointed out that it is not the best deck in the room, probably, to counter all of the meta decks that are at our disposal, but it is still a nice option because of the utility of Runic cards. And let's not forget about Rescue Ace, such a solid contender. Like I talked about before, this deck just does so much with Engine, obviously, and being paired up with non-Engine. It is a winning strategy, or almost a winning strategy. So this entire top 4, except for Branded, just made a ton of sense. But obviously we have to give props to Labyrinth as well. This deck is just so, so strong, and Dikabue has been playing it for quite a while, so it makes a ton of sense that a player of his caliber made it as far as he did with this deck and really showcasing the power behind it. So if we take a look back at Swiss, we saw some really, really good matches. This is definitely a plus when it comes to a diverse format. The viewing experience is much better for a lot of people than in a tier 0 format. Some players still enjoy watching just really good grindy mirror matches, which it might happen once Fire King becomes like tier 1 inevitably in the winter months of 2024. We might see many more mirror matches, but right now we need to talk about some of the notable wins on stream. So Centurion won round 1, and we also saw a version with Super Heavy Samurai, and I think this deck is like really, really good right now, and a lot of players picked it up. Some of them because of the surprise factor of Centurion cards, and others just see a lot of potential in this deck. We also saw Fire King achieve a very cool OTK on stream, which is just nice because right now this deck is sort of in a weird spot. It is not insane yet without the new support, but the Dogmatica version is kind of weak. We did see a really amazing Volcanic version, 60 card with Horus, Sinful Spoils, and Fire King, and it was just such a joy to watch this deck. The unfortunate thing with time happened, but this doesn't really matter. You know, we've had these time rules for a while now, so everyone's still complaining about them. It's just like mind-blowing to me. But yeah, you know, it was a really, really good showing for this deck. And there was a Vanadium mirror. Vanadium is still very much present in the meta, but one of the Vanadium decks was kind of annihilated by Nibiru, and it is still kind of fragile to that card. It really depends on how you combo. We saw a very grindy match between Joystone and Unchained that Unchained was able to take. We also saw Labyrinth win on stream, as well as Bestial Runic we talked about before. Branded, which this player definitely showcased Branded in a really, really good light. Like, we saw a lot of what the deck is able to do, as well as a contact fusion, which is always fun. There was Rika vs Mikanka, and we also saw Rescue Ace vs Vanquish Soul, where Rescue Ace proved why it's still one of the top decks in the meta 100%. And another of the very interesting decks was Runic Generator, which pretty much just wiped the floor with Pearly Sprite, although Pearly Sprite in itself is a really interesting deck as well. So Swiss was kind of wild. We saw a lot of things happen, and I really enjoy watching in that type of format, although it's kind of a tough situation to actually play in one. So share your thoughts if you went to the event and how did it go for you. Okay, so let's talk about some hand traps, some tech cards, and obviously one of the MVPs of both days, SP Little Knight. It is still such an insane card. It's gonna continue to dominate the meta. But let's talk about some hand traps that saw play. So obviously Ash being one of the most generic cards, it is still very, very useful. There's also Impermanence and Veiler, but in round 1, I wanted to point out that we saw Ghost Ogre, which is actually not a bad card against Centurion at all, so it might rise in popularity. Nibiru was kind of like, we saw a lot of people get Nibiru'd. Not every single time the Nibiru completely shut the game down. People still had plays, but it is a really good card in this format still, and yeah, I think it is nice, and you need to respect it and try to play around it to the best of your abilities. We also saw Droll, which is obviously such a powerful card, and it was even main decked. But as for some other cards, there was also Fenrir, which could be a going first or second card. We saw Lightning Storm, Cosmic Cyclone, as well as Triple Tactics Talent and Thrust, with hand traps still being really, really popular. Those two cards are going to see play as well. There was a couple Kurikara summons in the tournament as well, which was fun to see. And yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to some of the most notable cards. But let me know which ones you feel like had a ton of impact as well that I maybe didn't mention right now. So before we wrap this video up, I promised a couple deck lists for you guys. We are quickly gonna go through 2 of the Fire King deck lists. I want to take a look at both of them. Let me just prepare them. So for the most part, the engine is very, very similar, but we do see 2 Arvata in one deck list, but 3 Arvata in the other deck list, as well as the Spell Trap Negate, which is only present in one of those deck lists. There's also Rice Heart in one of the deck lists, but both of them actually feature 2 Diabellstar. So right now you want to play multiple copies, you want to have that consistency that you're kind of lacking at this point. What's interesting to me is that neither of the decks is playing Tinky. Now, this might be due to the reason that you would be playing into Draw with it. So for the most part, they are focusing on engine. And the non-engine is like hand traps, as well as Fenrir we see over here in both deck lists. And we also see Super Poly. And for the most part, everything else is just the spell cards that you have to play. Sanctuary, 3 copies in one deck list, 2 copies in the other, but this one does play Prosperity. I think Prosperity is vital for your consistency. I would personally run it, so I'm a little surprised why the other deck doesn't, but that's what they decided to do, and they have more non-engine. And as for the extra deck, there is Dingirsu, which is really cool, and everything else is like, okay, this deck has Super Poly targets, but let's check out the other one. There's a lot of utility. This deck can pretty much play your standard, like, fire extra deck, And I really love to lean into access code with the help of your charmer cards. I think that's awesome. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be it when it comes to the 2-deck list. And the last thing I wanted to mention, which I found so cool, and like props to Konami for doing that. I love that they were doing like little combo tutorials with renowned players during rounds. Like, okay, it does feel a little bit late. You know, we have seen these 2 decks, mainly I've seen like Unchained combos and Rescuers combos. We've seen these 2 decks perform for quite some time, but finally, you know, they managed to do this. And I'm not sure if they did it like at the previous YCSs. If they did, please correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I really love that they were doing that. And I think that's pretty much gonna be it. I liked watching this event a lot. It is amazing, like I said before, great viewing experience when you're watching a diverse format. So let me know if you enjoyed it as well. Of course, make sure to use my code Shadow if you're purchasing a sleeve cheap, and like the video if you enjoyed it. Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one.